Okay, the button pressing has commenced, and here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you, new person, if that's you. What's up, returning friend, if that's you. Maybe neither of those descriptions fits who you are. Regardless, you have chosen to listen, and I appreciate it. We are in the turn of season from winter to spring here in Easton, Pennsylvania, 2021, and it feels like we have entered a new kind of limbo state. Remaining lockdowns and restrictions are being lifted in lots of places as more and more people are getting vaccinated. Yet, it doesn't really feel like safe to return always yet. And there's still so much apprehension and fear. I was just talking to the teachers in my weekly teachers call a few days ago, getting some reports. Even in places where people are already vaccinated, they're still hesitant and not ready to come back together in person yet. Some people, I just think, want to wait longer because they still don't feel confident. Some people want to wait until they don't have to wear masks anymore. And I think that maybe on some level, after a year of isolation, people have just forgotten how to be together. Like our social being muscles have atrophied or something. And when I thought of that, it really actually made me feel newly inspired. In my experience, that's what yoga practice is best at. It's a vehicle for people to come together and relate in a context of mutual well-being. So I feel more determined than ever to figure out how and when we can be together again in person. And I'm wondering, whoever's listening to this, if you started getting back together again with people and what that's been like, and if we're waiting, how much longer we're waiting, I guess we don't know. We're waiting to see what happens still, as we have been for more than a year. But it definitely seems to me that this is going to be the work going forward. Coming together after all this time apart is going to feel awkward, maybe initially. It's going to be a bit uncomfortable. We were just talking about that on the show last week, about leaning into uncomfortability. And I just feel, as a yoga teacher, I want to take it on. Like I've often said that in the past. The job is basically just saying, I'll go first. To get us started, I'll go first. Of course, we need to be safe and smart and make sure we're following guidelines. But as soon as I think I can make it happen in a way that feels safe, I'm definitely getting back together with people. And this is definitely part of the discussion in today's talk with Norman Blair. Norman and I spoke a couple of years ago about pay equity for yoga teachers. And since then, he's been involved in creating a yoga teacher union in the UK. And some of his blog writing was very effective at helping yoga teachers get more money. We talk all about it. It was great to reconnect with him again and compare notes on what's been happening and really some possibilities for us to think creatively going forward. I was very happy to talk with him again. And I'm really glad that you're going to get to hear that today. Before we do, I do have some news about the show. It's kind of a significant change that's happened, which is we have a new primary sponsor of the show. If you've been around for a long time, Karmasoft has been sponsoring us. We're grateful to them. But things have shifted and changed in lots of ways in the industry and for me and for the show. And so going forward, we are now working with Moonclerk. And I'm feeling excited about this change because Moonclerk is what I personally use to accept recurring and one-time payments. If you have used any of my subscription services, then you have experienced Moonclerk yourself. And you know how easy it was to use, right? Well, it's even easier for me on the back end administratively. And for some years, I used PayPal, and, it's fine for a lot of teachers. Sometimes it makes sense to just use PayPal. But PayPal sucks on so many levels. Sometimes for the user, but definitely for you on the back end. Like trying to get the reports to do your numbers on PayPal, freaking nightmare. And not to mention, like PayPal as a company, if you look into it, it's kind of shitty company. It's not a great company to support. Again, sometimes it makes sense. We live in a confused and complicated world. But I'm telling you that Moonclerk is a million times better. My life got so much easier when we started using Moonclerk. And you will hear in today's conversation with Norman, we talk about how independent teachers are going to need to have their own platforms some if they're going to have sustainability going forward. And one of the main things that you need as a yoga teacher these days, if you're going to have your own platform, is a way to do billing. And Moonclerk makes your life so much easier. It makes the people who practice with you, their lives so much easier. You can also use it to sell digital products. You can also do a paid newsletter. There's other stuff you can do with Moonclerk. But for me, just the recurring and one-time payments alone is everything. So we're super excited to be working with Moonclerk. And I want to encourage you to go check it out. To make sure that they know we're sending you, go to jbrownyoga.com/moonclerk. That's jbrownyoga.com/MOONCLERK. jbrownyoga.com/moonclerk. I promise you, you will not regret it. I also want to mention that this episode is brought to you in support by Podcast Premium subscribers. People like Don Sopran and Leslie Carson. Shout out to Don and Leslie, both longtime supporters of the show. If you've been listening and you want to show some support and also get access to the full archives, then becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber is the way to do that. It's a choose your rate, and you can cancel at any time. If you do not have any money right now, all you have to do is email us, and we will give you a free account, no questions asked. To find out more about becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber, as well as find out about all of my stuff, my weekly teacher's call, the live stream classes, the online workshop, there's more. All of it can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, what else? Anything else? Let me look here. Oh, yes, let me not forget. I mentioned this in the outro last week, and I wanted to mention it again here. It also relates to my conversation with Norman today. One of the things that we talk about is a new way of yoga teachers maybe being more collective in how they're working together. And one of those things might involve doing space shares. I recently moved out of a space that I was renting myself into a shared space with a photographer. I talk about that some with Norman today. And last week I mentioned this, my business partner, Josh. He lives in Northampton, Amherst, Massachusetts area, and he has this space that is available that he knows of that is already built out and ready for someone to use for yoga classes. It is not very expensive. Let me just say that. Maybe just one person could afford it because it's not a very high overhead that you'd be taking over. However, it could also be a real opportunity for just a couple of teachers, maybe 2, 3, or 4, all with small little groups of people that they have email lists for. And it wouldn't cost very much money for them to share this space. And I think there's all kinds of ways that it can be worked out. I mentioned in the Yoga of Business course that we do, we've been kind of brainstorming this and seeing if we could game out different possibilities that might work and be more sustainable and fruitful. And we're going to see if we can maybe use this opportunity that Josh stumbled into as like a beta test. Let's see if we could make it actually work. So we're looking for a couple of yoga teachers in the Amherst, Massachusetts area. You don't want to be too far away from Amherst, but if that's you and you're listening right now, reach out to me through the website. Just go to the contact page on jbrownyoga.com, send us an email, and we will put you in touch. We would like to help facilitate this and see if we could use it as, again, like a pilot for a way that yoga teachers could maybe work together going forward. So, again, if that's you, Amherst, Massachusetts yoga teachers, email us. Okay, that I believe is it. I will touch base with you on the other side about a thing or two, but I think that's good for now. Let's go ahead and spend a little time doing some assessment of where we're at and what we're looking at going forward. And listen to this conversation that I had with Norman Blair. Hello?
Hello, Jay. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, Norman. How are you?
I'm all right.
Yeah, that sounded like an honest answer. There was like a tone in your voice, and I thought, okay, that was honest.
Well, no, yesterday morning I was very grumpy, so today's better.
Yeah, it comes and goes these days, doesn't it?
It does. So are we being recorded now?
We are. That's the usual modus, unless there's something that you wanted to say that you need to be off the record.
No. Nothing off the record.
Okay. Well, it's good to speak with you. It has been 2 years, almost last month, 2 years last month.
Wow. Time flies.
It really does. And, I was just reflecting back to our previous conversation, and we were talking about pay for yoga teachers and growth models for yoga centers. And it just seems like the last year has brought many things into stark relief, hasn't it?
A lot has happened in the last year. So I think when we were talking, Jay, we didn't mention the fact there might be a pandemic as an example.
No.
There has been a pandemic, and it's been a huge upheaval on yoga teaching and yoga studios.
Yes, the whole world, but for sure on yoga teachers and yoga studios. Let me just ask you, how have you been? How have you fared? I mean, I know you, like me, we talked about having like smaller circles, smaller sanghas and smaller platforms in a way that was more sustainable than like out there on social media and trying to gain more reach.
Yeah, a key factor for me is around sustainability, but also what's been one of the great lessons of this last year has been about adaptability. And people would talk to me pre-pandemic, pre-March last year, and they would suggest, oh, do you want to teach online or do you want to run some courses online? And I would say, absolutely not. It's almost like I don't believe in teaching online. And then in the last 12 months, that's all I've done. And, personally, I made a fairly smooth transition right at the beginning to teaching online, both courses and workshops, also classes. And in some ways, I'm teaching courses, and I've got people coming along from, not that just down the road from you, in like on the East Coast of the US, and I've got people coming from like Hong Kong. So suddenly there's this big international reach. But I know for a lot of teachers, it's been a really, really tough time, and a lot of people have given up teaching for this time because they simply can't afford to make ends meet.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. And I guess the thought I had is that, like, your ability to do that, to transition online. I was already online. I have a good friend, Josh Citron, who in 2017 told me, you have to start live streaming all of your classes. And like you, I said, you're crazy. I'm not doing, you know what I mean? We fought about it. But he saw the writing on the wall even before the pandemic and said, you're going to let go of this center at some point because the rent keeps going up and it's not sustainable for you to have it. And when you do, all of these people and all of these relationships you've had that you've developed over 10 years, none of them are going to have a way to connect with you. But if you start live streaming your classes now, you'll go anywhere in the world and still live stream, and those people will still have a way to connect with you.
I've been astonished at how well the Zoom connection has worked. And, really, as I said before, I was very skeptical about online teaching. And it definitely does work. But I also, for myself personally, and I know for a lot of practitioners, there's a real hunger for being back in physical proximity, back in the studio together. When that happens and how that happens, I'm not so clear. And, there are the whole issues of like, well, you've got these rent payments and you're going to have social distancing classes. So therefore the class numbers are substantially less than they were. There's lots of different issues going on. What I want to do is try and look at this situation as imaginatively and creatively as possible. So it's trying to let go of some of the old models. And it's like, well, how can we make this work for both the teachers and the people coming along to classes and the studios? So what can we do? And I unfortunately, I don't have some kind of magic wand. I'm like, this is the answer. But I do think that we need to think together about what we can do to make yoga practice, yoga teaching sustainable for everyone.
I couldn't agree more with that. Before we get to that last part about working together to make it more sustainable and work for everybody, I want to go back to just the Zoom classes, because like you, I have found that it can be effective. Like I have fruitful yoga practice and relationships building with people all over the world through those Zoom classes that I wouldn't be able to do without that technology. And like you, I am also very hungry to be in the same room together. I'm even just wondering, are we shaking hands and hugging again? Because I would really like to do that if we can.
Things are changing all the time. So, I think that will be happening at some point in the future, whether that's in 3 months or next spring, I don't know. But there are definite shifts, and for a variety of different reasons, which will mean that shaking hands, hugging will become possible.
I sure hope so. And I guess what I was going to go to is that I've been having ongoing conversations with teachers, because I have this teachers call that I do every week, and just among friends about the sort of dilemma that people have right now as they're looking at going back to doing in-person classes and maybe teaching at centers again after having taught all of their classes from their living room for the last year. And I just think that at this point, a lot of those teachers also have their own classes in a way, because they have their own email list.
Yes.
And so they're teaching sometimes classes through a center still, centers have they've wanted to support centers, or sometimes centers have done a good job of being able to continue to pay their teachers through this, which is amazing. But I think that what's the problem now is a lot of the centers, like you said, the Zoom classes aren't going away. And they're all like creating these digital libraries that are now a service that people can subscribe to. So if a teacher is getting paid, even a decent rate, and I want to give you props, and we can come to this later, that one of your blogs actually got teachers a pay raise.
Yes.
That's amazing. As a blogger myself, that's so cool that happened, Norman. But even if someone was getting, let's say, a decent rate, let's say I heard someone say a center was offering them $50 a class as a guarantee. And that's really good, especially right now.
That's great. Yeah.
But the problem is, Norman, that class is being recorded and becoming part of a digital library that people pay for. So that center will make money off of that video, that class, in perpetuity. I don't know that's a good idea because this is like teachers' life's work sometimes, these classes. And now that we're in a digital world and they're being recorded, that becomes like a product, that becomes content. And if somebody's going to make money off of it into the future...
But this was existing pre-pandemic. The whole thing with like classes up on YouTube. What's that? Yoga with Adrian. So there was already content available. I think that, Zoom classes are definitely here to stay, but there is a particular experience of a live class. So you can have a live class on Zoom. You can also have a live class in person. And it's a different feeling from just like clicking onto some library and, doing a half a class.
Yes, but see the thing, they're going to happen simultaneously now. And I've done it. I have like a projector and a screen, and I have had people in person and people online at the same time.
Yeah. So in the UK, we're calling those hybrid classes. And in my experience, they mean more work for the teacher.
Maybe. I mean, I've managed it, and here's the thing. I think if you're going to teach us, full well, we talked about this last time, like 20 classes a week is not sustainable.
Exactly.
Right. So if I manage to get myself into a space, and we can talk about this later, I just moved from having my own lease to moving into a space share, but we can go into that later. But if I, decide, okay, I can do 4 classes a week and still sustain all my other responsibilities, or 5 classes, 4 or 5 is kind of my max, I think, really. And still record podcasts and do all the other stuff that I do. So let's say, and I do that consistently every week. So let's say I decide that's as many classes that I do. So the issue is that if I have to teach like classes for my live stream subscriptions, like online, and then separate classes off, not so sustainable. But if I can just teach those 5 classes and they're available to people all around the world as a live stream subscription, and for people to be able to drop in, that's ideal. And frankly, the subscription, I don't know how you guys are doing your billing, but the subscriptions are way more sustainable over time than people dropping in and putting money in the box.
I think there are different ways of doing this. And, whether it's just doing it like you're describing, subscription, or whether it's, drop-in class, or whether, people access a library and they pay for accessing that library. I think that there are lots of different ways of doing it.
Yeah, that's true. Of course there are. And
but yeah, I have a reluctance around, I think, people need to be careful about making too much content freely available. And also I do wonder, it's kind of like, there's all this content out there, but how much of it is actually watched? I don't know. But I do think, I've had people say, oh, will you record this or that? Can that be recorded? And then it is. And afterwards, I think, well, did you actually watch it? I'm not sure. Maybe some did and maybe some didn't.
Yes, I hear you. I mean, I agree with you about, there's always this issue of like full-length free content out there is a bad idea for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think that people these days, it's the same issue it was before, and it happened in other industries, like for musicians. Exactly. It's the point I was trying to make earlier, that like right now you're an independent creator as a yoga teacher, and you don't want to give away ownership. So the reason why I get a little bit concerned about teachers being enticed by $50 a class when their class is going to be recorded is whoever owns the Zoom account, and gets the recording, owns that recording. And I just worry about that yoga teachers giving away too much ownership. And in a way, because we all have Zoom accounts in living rooms, in a way, teachers are more empowered to have their own platforms more than ever before. Like, they don't need the centers as much as they might have in the past.
So that's definitely true for some teachers. And I think some teachers will continue from here just doing online classes. There is a difference between a live class where there's that kind of spontaneity. I don't know how you're doing it, Jay, but when people come along to a class, I'm interacting with people.
Right.
It's not, I'm not just reading a script, I'm interacting with people. And clearly you won't get that if you're watching something that's been recorded. So some teachers will continue just providing online classes. That's great. Some teachers, like myself, really want to get back into physical proximity with people, which will require having a physical structure, like a studio.
I think that's true. I will say that at first, when I first started doing live stream classes, they were only live. Like, there was no replay.
Yeah.
You had to be there for class. But like you say, there's people all over the world in different time zones, and that they weren't able to make it to the class live. So we did start archiving, but we only archive one class, the most recent class at a time. So we don't have like an infinite scroll. Because I think you're right. Like, if you go and do a digital library of yoga classes and it's just an infinite scroll of Zoom thumbnails, you're not going to, how are you going to, unless there's like extensive notes and they're themed out classes or something like that.
Yeah.
You're not going to watch it. But I will say this, I do have many people subscribe to my subscription who aren't able to come live and do take the classes on replay. And they do come to feel like they know the people in the class because I'm talking to people who are there or whatever, But your point is well taken. I don't think there's a replacement for like the pheromones and the sound of my voice going directly into someone's ear canal and like being in the same room. I don't think you can, it's a facsimile.
I think teachers need to be very careful about having too much pre-recorded content. And, what I feel is that as teachers, we need to make sure we're valuing what we're doing. And if we're making too much stuff too freely available, then that's devaluing our work. That's devaluing all the training that we've been doing, all the practice that we're doing.
I think that's true. And it goes back to something I said earlier, like the putting out of the free content. The idea is that people will see it and it'll gain reach. It'll get you more followers or whatever. And I think that what I've discovered is that actually creating a few barriers of entry or something makes for a more deeper commitment or relationship. Like my friend was telling me about how he wanted to get his daughter into martial arts. And there was like a local martial arts place that was this elderly couple, Asian couple. And they basically, like, in order to study there, you have to commit to a full year, and it's like $140 a month, like $1,500 in total. And you have to sign a contract. And like, that's it. There's no other options.
Good.
And he said that it actually made them be more committed and her be more disciplined. And, and he was sort of saying, why wouldn't yoga centers be more like that? And that's in stark contrast to what we were talking about 2 years ago, where, teachers are getting paid $25 a class and they're running the Groupon deals and just trying to get as many people in class, but really only being able to survive because of teacher training.
So it's, I do have a class freely available on YouTube, but I've only got one class there and it's been there for probably about 4 or 5 years. And so if someone wants to know, like, how do I teach? I can say, well, here's a class. You can just go along and look at this class. But that's just one, it's that little one bit that's available. I just think that to kind of encourage that sense of what you talked about then, of like commitment, what we might describe as relational yoga. So where someone is committed to coming along to class and we can develop that relationship rather than someone, and I think we covered this when we talked before, you can have, like particularly in the big cities, like say New York or London, people can skip from studio to studio, just taking advantage of the £10 for a month. Right. And they go from one studio to another studio to another studio. But there's not a commitment from that practitioner with their teacher. And in a sense, it's just like skimming the surface.
Right. And if the classes are just about skimming the surface, then that's fine. But that's why I know a lot of teachers, when things transitioned in that direction, and, even I think what happened was you had all these independent centers that opened up, like the place I had. But when Yoga Works and Modo and Core Power came in, they ended up having to kind of emulate some of the things that they did in order to compete. And then ultimately, I think that, we lost, there was distance created, more and more distance created between teachers and students in that process.
This whole process of corporatization of yoga and, the bigger studios and the rock star teachers, I think, isn't a direction, I wish to take my teaching in. I would rather keep it in a kind of with, smaller groups and having that kind of more intimate connection.
Right. And I guess that's the thing. Sometimes I also think, before I go there, I think there's a little bit of a distinction that should be made, because we discovered this in my teacher's class, that there is a difference between teachers who don't even think of their teaching as maybe like a way to make a living. Like maybe they don't need to make a living off of it. Maybe they've got other resources, or maybe they've got another job, and that this is just a coupling, a thing that they do that's part of what they do, but they don't need to make money off of it so much. But then there's other people who are really seeing if they can try to make some kind of living off of it.
Everyone's in different circumstances. And as you said, there are some people who are teaching yoga who are not, who don't need it as an income stream. And what I would say to people like that is make sure you're not undercutting the teachers who are making, this is their livelihood. But I think, as teachers, we need to be, looking at people in all these different places. Like I say, you and I, we've been teaching for a long time. So we've built up a kind of constituency. And then for teachers who are just starting now, it's much harder. But I think that also sometimes I remember meeting a teacher a while back, and they had an expectation that doing a 200-hour training, this whole 200-hour package, was enough to give them a full-time career. And I was thinking, well, that's, I think that's not, not really appropriate. That just doing a 200-hour training does not equate into a full-time career.
Well, I think most people in the yoga world know that by now, but yes. I also have to share with you, I heard kind of the craziest thing, that right now, I met somebody who did their 200-hour training over the last year online. And their first ever classes were online classes. They've never taught an in-person class.
Yeah.
And I was dumbfounded by that. I can't imagine. To me, like you said, there's this act of showing up to a space with people.
Yes.
And engaging them and having a practice. And then when I do the online classes, I'm, like I said, it's like a facsimile. I'm bringing as much of that experience to it as I can, but it's not the actual experience. But I guess the other thing I want to say is, to your other point about new teachers, I sympathize with them a lot. And they ask me, well, how do I get new students if I'm not teaching at a center? And, I really do think that is a question in terms of, yes, there are sometimes more students at a center, but if that center could just close and you don't have anything to go from there, you're just left holding the bag, which has happened to a lot of people this year, then you're not really building what you're talking about in terms of like constituencies like you and I may have over many years. That in certain ways right now, I almost feel like people are better off just seeing if they can start teaching their neighbor.
Exactly.
Like developing your relationships in your community. Like they don't have to be at a yoga center.
Keep it small, keep it local.
Yeah. Yeah.
And slowly, slowly build it up over time. But I think, it's a kind of the nature of like the modern world, isn't it? In a lot of impatience, a lot of like wanting it all now.
Well, and I think that there's, just like we have this impulse to want to get back in person, a lot of people just want to get back to what we were doing. And I don't know how, a lot of people, it isn't possible because of the rents. We talked about this 2 years ago, all those leases that were hanging on everybody's shoulders that they were running all the teacher trainings to meet the overhead for. They became like nooses around everybody's neck with the clock, and that's why YogaWorks is gone.
Yeah, it's a great image, Jay, nooses around necks. There are also studios where they've negotiated with landlords to make the rent more, let's say, lower, more appropriate.
Right.
So again, this whole point about, different circumstances.
And I want to be careful because in a recent blog that I wrote, and then in stuff I've said on this show, I've gotten feedback from yoga center owners who feel like I'm attacking them. Like there's yoga center owners out there who've like done their darndest and they're really good people, really trying to do right by teachers and students. And then I'm like, we don't need those centers anymore. Fuck you. And they're like upset about that. And I don't mean to do that. And I'm sure there are people out there, like you said, who've managed and are doing right by people.
Absolutely. Some yoga centers have done incredibly well in this difficult time. And as a teacher, I want to support those centers. It's like, because I did read your blog piece about where it's kind of been like saying, let's all go online. And I'm like, I don't want to be online. I want to be teaching in person. And in a city like London, that means teaching in studios.
I hear that. But you were also teaching in person prior to the pandemic, not in studios. You had your own little space.
We have my partner and I, we have a small studio at home. So, right. That's where we'd run courses from. But I also want to be out there teaching classes with, the courses here are limited in number because of the size of the space. So I want to be out there teaching classes where, potentially more people can come along.
Sure. I appreciate that too. I think that's true. I guess my concern is that if the student base that you build as a teacher is contingent on a center, it's not sustainable.
I think it's just we doing it different ways. As much as being at a center and someone comes along to the center and then you say, I'm teaching a retreat, and they come along on the retreat. So it's not like all your eggs are in one basket.
I think that's true. I might be being too myopic.
Yeah.
I guess, what I will say too, though, is you mentioned you've got students over here on the East Coast taking class with you. So when you go back to teaching in person, they're not going to be able to take class with you anymore?
So who knows what happens, Jay? But I think probably I will carry on running some kind of maybe a little bit of online presence. Yeah. So if someone on the East Coast wanted to come along to a class with me, they're very welcome to come along. But I would like the majority of my teaching, the substantial majority of my teaching, to be in person.
Oh, I appreciate that. I like to hear that. I don't think that we can give it up, though. Honestly, it's the reason why I did okay this year, is because I already had built that up some. And again, I just think that sometimes it seems like, I don't know, the spaces aren't as important as the people. Like I wrote that. It's not about the poses, it's about the people. It's not about the spaces, it's about the people, about you connecting with the people who want to study with you.
I want to see people three-dimensionally.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm always arguing your side to my producer, so I'm with you. I do like
on a rectangle on the screen. I want to see people three-dimensionally. And I think as human beings, we need, we're herd animals. We need a herd to survive. We need a herd to thrive. And part of that is physical proximity. So clearly, because of the pandemic, that has been unable to happen apart from like this way, the virtual way. But definitely, I think we need to be back in contact with each other, whether that's in 3 months, 6 months, spring next year. I don't know when it will be, but I definitely think that will happen. And that's what I want to happen.
All right. Well, speaking about getting back together and what that's going to look like, it's sort of grossly ironic in a way that both here in the United States with the Yoga Works teachers unionizing, although it's a different story over there, in the UK, you all just managed to get like a yoga teachers union officially. That all happened right before like all the big corporate centers that you would be negotiating with closed down. Like Yoga Works is gone just after they managed to unionize their employees.
Great timing. But what can you do? I think it's wonderful that yoga teachers are being more public about private difficulties. I think it's wonderful that yoga teachers are having more of a collective approach to the question of how do we keep going? What we talked about before, teaching 20 plus classes a week is simply unsustainable. It's not sensible for us to do that. It doesn't work. So how do we make sure that we are financially managing in the yoga industry? And what has happened in the past is there's been a lot of attention paid to say, the studios, they've got to keep going. Fair enough. The customers, the yoga students, we want to make sure it's accessible. Fair enough. But the people who have been getting squeezed in that process have been the yoga teachers. So just the simple fact of talking openly about pay, talking openly about conditions in studios, because there are some studios that have worked wonderfully well and there are some studios that have not, is a great step forward.
I think that's true.
If we do not have awareness of something, we're not able to change it. So we have to start with the awareness. And I've had innumerable conversations with yoga teachers, the grumbling, the quiet grumbling. And actually, let's make this more public.
Yes, I'm all for that. And I think it's a good moment to go back to what I said earlier and just, give you some props for that blog post. Tell me about what happened, because I remember reading the blog post. I think it was like last September.
Yes.
Where you're basically just writing about how you felt like the pay inequity once again. Tell me what happened with the blog post. And then there was actually action that took place, right?
Yeah, there was action at one of the studios. They did change their pay policy. So that's good. And it's a good example of to actually stand up and say, this is not acceptable. But I'm also conscious in the pandemic, everyone is struggling. Well, not everyone is struggling.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.